I've welcomed you. You've joined us. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, Pete, for sharing, Brother Don for sharing, Winnie for sharing. And hopefully now this will be a good sharing also. Let me just check one thing here. Yes, okay. Now I have to open up our lesson study. Here it is. Before we do anything else, we're going to read Daniel 7, most of it, if not all of it, because we started it last week and hopefully we can complete it now. We're 1 week behind. We're going to move into Daniel 8. And brothers and sisters, I don't know how we can cover this important chapter of 7, the important chapter of 8, in one Sabbath school lesson, but that's what's required. It takes a special talent to do that, and I'm not sure I have that talent, but we're going to try. So here we go. Chapter 7, we read the first few verses last time. 2 says, Daniel spake, and that he spake by writing, and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of the heaven strove upon the great sea. The four great beasts came up, and then there was a lion, and verse 5, a bear, verse 6, a leopard, verse 7, a terrible beast, verse 8, the horns, and is this where we hear the little horn? Yes. And then verse 9 is a judgment scene with the Ancient of Days and thousands of thousands that are before him and assist him. And then we have the interpretation. Now, I know we didn't really read that, but we're going to read it as we go on. Now, I would like for you to think. I'm going to be using some of Uriah Smith later on. He says, this part in verse 9 and verse 10 is the sublimest of all things pertaining to this particular subject. It's beautiful. Now, sublime, you probably know, but I just want to refresh your mind. It means excellence, grandeur, beauty that inspires admiration and awe. And in this judgment scene, of the Ancient of Days and thousands of beings and the dominion given to Christ, all of this, he calls it the sublimest, or maybe the sublimer. I don't think he uses the est. But I would like for you to think about all you know about the scripture and think about what chapter you would call the sublimest chapter in the Bible. Now remember, it means excellency, grandeur, beauty. It inspires awe. When you read it, you are in amazement of this great God we know and serve in our Savior Jesus Christ. What chapters come to mind? You might think of John 3 because of that beautiful verse in verse 16, 3:16, for God so loved the world. Important, beautiful concept. Yes, you might think of Genesis 1 about the creation, the great God of creation and how man came into existence. Or even Genesis 3, where sin enters the world. And we have that beautiful promise in Genesis 3. Is it 3:15? Um, let's look. I will put enmity between thee and the woman. What a wonderful concept. What a terrific promise we can hold on to. There are other chapters and places I've thought of, but if you'd like to text in one that I've missed, but I also thought of, let's see, Matthew 5, the Sermon on the Mount about the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven for us, and the principles taught there. How much better and more awe-inspiring can it be? Matthew 5, Isaiah 9, in the section about the government shall be on his shoulders, and in that section, his name shall be called Wonderful, etc. Beautiful words. Daniel 8, which comes after our studying Daniel 8:14 especially. And then I think of Daniel 7, because in Daniel 7, and I think this would be my choice. I don't know about you, but it would be my choice, I think, because we have a great prophecy given about the nations until the end of the world. So we have that in Daniel 7. We have this little horn that greatly troubled Daniel, and I've wondered, did he ever get understanding of what we know now, looking back and in hindsight, of the papacy and Rome and life after the world's life after the ascension of Christ. But we have this little horn, this great and terrible beast, all presented here in Daniel 7. And in addition to that, we have this majestic um, scene of judgment. And so when we sang hymn number 1, before Jehovah's great and awful throne, yes, that's right here in Daniel 7. So that's just a little thought for you to contemplate later on about how majestic and sublime this chapter is, and the truths that are, of course, that's what makes it sublime, the great truths that are presented in this chapter. Now, first of all, you know this. How many beasts are in chapter 7? Well, of course, there are 4. And how did Daniel initially describe them? Not when we talk about each beast individually, but he used a couple words at the beginning of his narrative. And they were, let's see, great. These beasts were great. They were diverse, and they came up from the sea. And then, of course, what were they? We summarized them earlier: a lion, a bear, a leopard, and then a terrible unknown beast that's not known anywhere in nature. Okay, so let's go on. Let's consider the first beast. Let's read about it first, and then we'll summarize it. Daniel 7. The first beast is in chapter 7, verse 4. The first was like a lion, and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given it. So, summarizing, it had eagle's wings that were plucked off. It was lifted up from the earth, made to stand upon the feet as a man, and given the heart of a man. Now, if it's a righteous heart, that would be good, wouldn't it? But Uriah Smith brings out, and I don't know if I have it in the quote here, and if so, that's okay, but that the heart of a man is timid compared to the heart of a lion. And so it was a lion, but then its wing with eagle's wings that were plucked off and became like a man with the heart of a man. Now, we're kind of prejudiced with our hearts. We think if God abides in us, and it's true, we have the mind of Christ. We think his thoughts. We want his ways. We desire to do his will. And so that's good. But in this particular symbol of a lion, we usually think of a lion as being courageous, aggressive, unless she has eaten well. And and so that's a different kind of a symbol than standing on your feet, and in other words, like feet as a man, instead of having 4 feet to run on and wings to help you run. So that's a diminishment. Let's see, I think I have something. Uriah Smith, Daniel and Revelation 1909, 127.2. At First, the lion had eagle's wings, denoting the rapidity with which Babylon extended its conquests under Nebuchadnezzar. At this point in the vision, a change had taken place. Its wings had been plucked. It no longer flew like an eagle upon its prey. The boldness and spirit of the lion were gone. A man's heart, weak, timorous, and faint, had taken its place. Such was emphatically the case with the nation during the closing years of its history, when it had become enfeebled and effeminate through wealth and luxury. Now, let's look at the bear. We read about the bear in verse 5, and behold, another beast, a second, like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. We don't know up to this point who the they are, who said this. Later on in the chapter, we'll read that Daniel asked one of the angels there the interpretation. And so maybe it was this they, some of these angels said, Arise, devour much flesh. And so here we have it summarized, raised up itself on one side, 3 ribs in the mouth, between its teeth. Arise, devour much flesh. Now, Uriah Smith says this about this beast, as in the great image of chapter 2. So, in this series of symbols, a marked deterioration will be noticed as we descend from one kingdom to another. The silver of the breast and arms, that's in Daniel 2, was inferior to the gold of the head. The bear was inferior to the lion. Medo-Persia fell short of Babylon in wealth and magnificence and the brilliancy of its career. And now we come to additional particulars respecting this power. The bear raised itself up on one side. This kingdom was composed of 2 nationalities, the Medes and the Persians. And he goes on to explain that one was more important, more aggressive, so to speak, than the other. And that's why the bear shows it being raised up on one side. Daniel and Revelation has a lot to say about these beasts. I'm just pulling in a paragraph or two. Now we're moving on to the leopard in verse 6. And after this I beheld, and lo, another, like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given it. Now, I would just like to go back to where we, in verse 1, where it says, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. But, pardon me, at the end of the chapter, Daniel says, Hitherto is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my cogitations much troubled me, and my countenance changed in me, but I kept the matter in my heart. So I'm not sure if he, at the time, shared his dream with any of his friends or anyone, but he wrote it down. Now, perhaps you have had significant dreams that were meaningful to you. Maybe 20 years ago and you still remember it, maybe recently, but even though Daniel was 10 times greater mentally or cognitively than his companions at the end of the school term, uh, maybe he was afraid he would forget some of these details. And so he wrote it down. Does it say, it doesn't say when, but the impression is right away. And aren't you thankful for that? Because, just a minute. Those on the phone, I've lost connection, so I have to go back. So just give me a minute, please. Join and put my... Okay, brothers and sisters, I lost connection. I hope you can hear me now. If someone could just say, good to go or whatever. Good. Thanks, Brother John. We'll get back and going. So, I was talking about when we have dreams. Sometimes we have dreams that are very real to us, um, and that we don't forget. I remember dreaming maybe 5 years ago a fire up in the next hollow so big that it was over the treetops and rushing, and that so I keep praying that God will not let fire come near me, our home here and our land here, because that dream was so real and it was so out of the ordinary. So maybe you have dreams too that have been important to you and you haven't forgotten, even though it may be years, but you might forget the details as time goes by. But Daniel didn't want to take that chance. He wrote it down. And I am so thankful he wrote it down, aren't you? All the details are important. And this next to last beast, this leopard with 4 wings as a fowl on its back, 4 heads, dominion was given it. Let's see how, let me move that over and do this for the benefit of the recording. I think we're okay. No, not really. Have to refigure this. Sorry, Pastor, but I lost connection. There we go. Now I think we're close to where we should be. So let's see what Uriah Smith has to say. 128.2. The third kingdom, Grecia, is represented by this symbol. Maybe I should straighten up here. If wings upon the lion signified rapidity of conquest, they would signify the same here, he says. The leopard itself is a swift-footed beast, but this was not sufficient to represent the career of the nation, which it symbolized in this respect. It must have wings in addition. 2 wings, the number the lion had, were not sufficient either. It must have 4. This would denote unparalleled celerity of movement, which we find to be historically true of the Grecian kingdom. The conquests of Grecia under Alexander the Great have no parallel in historic annals for suddenness and rapidity. And so, this beast, is symbolic of the nation of Greece and Alexander the Great and the rapidity with which he conquered the neighboring areas. Going on in Uriah Smith, the beast also had 4 heads. The Grecian Empire maintained its unity, but little longer than the lifetime of Alexander. Within a few years after his brilliant career ended in a fever induced by a drunken debauch, the empire was divided among his 4 leading generals. Cassander had Macedon and Greece in the west. Lysimachus had Thrace and the parts of Asia on the Hellespont and Bosphorus in the north. Ptolemy received Egypt, Lydia, Arabia, Palestine, and some part of Syria in the south, and Seleucus had Syria and all the rest of Alexander's dominions in the east. These divisions were denoted by the 4 heads of the leopard. So the 4 wings and being a leopard was symbolic of the speed of which Alexander the Great made his conquests, and the four heads represent how his kingdom was divided. But we have this great and terrible beast that has no counterpart in the natural world. Let's read about it in verse 7 onward. And this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it. Well, we already know that. We read about in verse 3 that the four beasts were diverse one from another, but this one was really diverse. Going on in verse 7, and it was from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of man, and a mouth speaking great things. And then we have the judgment scene coming up. So, to summarize, and I've added some numbers here from later verses about this great, terrible, and strong beast. Great iron teeth devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue. It was diverse, again, we're told, a second time, the diversity of this beast. And he had 10 horns. A little horn came up from among the 10, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. Now, I want to just stop here. There is so much that can be said about chapter 7, and I can't possibly bring in everything. So if you think of something that I've seemed to have missed or haven't touched upon, just chat it in for the benefit of the rest, because we need each other. Several minds are better than just one. So please share what you would like in the chat, and I'll look at it as time goes on. But the horn had eyes like the eyes of man, and a mouth speaking great things. Later on in the chapter, we are told that the beast was slain, his body destroyed and given to the burning flame, and that the little horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them. I don't have times, and a dividing of time, but it's coming up. Back to Uriah Smith on this beast. He says, he says a lot, and I've just pulled out a paragraph or two, like I mentioned. Daniel considered the horns. Indications of a strange movement appeared among them. A little horn, at first little, but afterward more stout than its fellows, thrust itself up among them. It was not content quietly to find a place of its own and fill it. It must thrust aside some of the others and usurp their places. 3 kingdoms were plucked up before it. This little horn, as we shall have occasion to notice more fully hereafter, was the papacy. The 3 horns plucked up before it were the Huruli, Ostrogoths, and the Vandals. And the reason why they were plucked up, Smith tells us, was because they were opposed to the teaching and claims of the papal hierarchy, and hence to the supremacy in the church of the Bishop of Rome. Now we move to the Ancient of Days and the judgment scene. The Bible tells us thrones were cast down. That's in verse 9, cast down. That Hebrew term can mean being set down. Thrones were set. The Ancient of Days did sit. We didn't read it. Let's keep on reading here before I summarize it. Verse 9, I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like the pure wool. The throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were opened. So the summary is here. Thrones were set, Ancient of Days did sit. Thousands ministered unto him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set and the books were opened. And then later on in the chapter, we're told the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven to the Ancient of Days and was given a dominion, glory, and a kingdom. We'll read that in just a little bit. Now, here's where Uriah Smith uses sublimer. He says, a sublimer description of a sublimer scene is not to be found in the English language. He was an editor. He used words well, and he says this scene in Daniel 9, verses 9, about the thrones being set and the thousands of thousands and the fiery stream and so forth. No words express anything better than what Daniel has written here. But not only on account of the grand and lofty imagery introduced should it arrest our attention, the nature of the scene itself is such as to demand serious consideration. The judgment is brought to view. And whenever the judgment is mentioned, it ought to take an irresistible hold on every mind, for all have an interest in its eternal issues. And here we remember now, we've read about this chain of prophecy, starting with the lion, going to the terrible beast and the little horn, and making war with the saints. We read about this prophecy. But also, we have this great judgment scene. No greater scene in the Bible about the judgment could be stated, except we have the judgment also mentioned in Revelation. But here he describes it. He saw it, brothers and sisters. We only know what he saw. We've never seen it unless God has blessed you in a way that he hasn't blessed the rest of us, but he saw this judgment scene. He saw the Ancient of Days and the thousands of there before his throne. He saw the Son of Man coming to receive a dominion. What a great, great vision. But let's go on. Let's see what's next. Now, we're going to go to the interpretation. Let's look at Daniel 7, and we haven't read 11 and onward, so we'll read a little bit here. Verse 11 says, I beheld then, because of the voice of the great words which the horn spake. I beheld even till the beast was slain, and his body destroyed and given to the burning flame. As concerning the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and time. And so when Babylon gave way to Medo-Persia, Babylon was taken over, but Greece has remained. You see, some of these nations have remained even for our time. Pardon me, please. 13. I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. And there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. Next verse. I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit, in the midst of my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. I came near unto one of them that stood by, and asked him the truth of all this. So he told me, and made me know the interpretation of the things. And the interpretation that he gave, is just verses 17 and 18. So let's read it. 17. These great beasts, which are four kings, which shall arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. And that ends his interpretation. All of this that Daniel saw is summed up into this interpretation. Again, it's the four beasts are kings. And I just want to stop there for a minute. Some translations use kingdoms. They're kingdoms. So it's translated here kings or kingdoms, it could be, which shall arise out of the earth. That's the summary of these beasts. They're kingdoms or kings. But the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom. The end result after war is made against the saints and the judgment takes place and all of it, the end result is the saints will take possession of the kingdom forever and ever and ever. So the summary of the interpretation is the beasts are kings / kingdoms, but the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess it forever. But Daniel wasn't satisfied. Going on, he didn't help him in the part that really troubled him. And he says in verse 19, Then I would know the truth of the fourth beast, which was diverse from all the others, exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were of iron, and his nails of brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet. And of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints, and prevailed against them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. And then whoever it is that gave the interpretation of 16 and 17 said in 23, Thus he said, The fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. Here, brothers and sisters, you have the clearest description of the papacy. We're going to have other verses about this man of sin and other ways of describing it. But here we get this description. That's why this chapter is so meaningful to me. So much information is in it. Let's see, diverse from the others. That's verse 23. Tread down, break it in pieces. Now 24. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume and to destroy it unto the end. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. We're not worthy, brothers and sisters, but that's our God. He's giving us this kingdom. Anyway, to the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. And now the last verse again. Hitherto is the end of the matter. End of his writing. He's written it all down now. Hitherto is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my cogitations much troubled me, and my countenance changed in me, but I kept the matter in my heart. And brothers and sisters, I haven't had, I'm ignorant in a lot of ways, but I don't know if he ever understood this. If you know, please share with me, because I can't think of a place. We're told at the end, go thy way, Daniel, and so forth. But this is for the time of the end. And maybe he'll learn just as we're learning from his words what it is all about. But nevertheless, it troubled him. His countenance changed, and he kept it to himself. Now, let's review this dreadful beast. Devour the whole earth, we've just read. 10 horns are 10 kingdoms. The little horn shall subdue 3 kings. Speak great words against the Most High. Wear out the saints, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times and a dividing of time. And this little horn will think to change times and laws going on. Oh, this is, I just found this in my study and I wanted to share it with you. It's from Letter 32, 1899 by Ellen White. Paragraph 9. To Daniel was given a vision of fierce beasts, representing the powers of the earth. But the ensign of the Messiah's kingdom is a lamb. While earthly kingdoms rule by the ascendancy of physical power, Christ is to banish every carnal weapon, every instrument of coercion. His kingdom was to be established to uplift and ennoble fallen humanity. So, to me, this was a really nice comparison. These kingdoms of the world use war, they force, they're aggressive, but not Christ's kingdom. It's symbolized by a lamb. And every instrument of coercion he is to banish, every instrument of force. His kingdom, he is the Lamb of God. And that's the way we are to be, brothers and sisters. We're not to rely, I'm going to have another verse is coming up, rely on force. Back to Uriah Smith. And now we're going to talk about the symbolism of what we've read here. In verses 2 and 3, he states that the language here used, let's review 2 and 3. Great and terrible beasts. Four winds of the heaven, the great sea, the great, not all are great and terrible, the great beasts from the sea diverse from one another. He mentions that the language here, of course, my words, of course, is symbolic. And that's evident from verse 17, which we read, which says, These great beasts, which are 4 kings which shall arise out of the earth, of course, symbolic of kings. And to show that kingdoms are intended and not merely individual kings, the angel continues, but the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom. And so King James Version translates it kings, and the Hebrew does mean a reigning ruler. But the angel is expanding on that in verse 23 when it says, The 4th beast shall be the 4th kingdom upon the earth. Now, going on, he says, these beasts are therefore symbols of four great kingdoms, and the circumstances under which they arose and the means by which their elevation was accomplished as represented in the prophecy are symbolic also. The symbols introduced are the four winds, the sea, the four great beasts, 10 horns, another horn which had eyes and a mouth, and rose up in war against God and his people. And then he goes on to explain the winds denote strife, political commotion, and war. And he uses Jeremiah 25. Let's look at Jeremiah 25. 31 to 33 state, a noise shall come even to the ends of the earth, for the Lord hath a controversy with the nations. He will plead with all flesh. He will give them that are wicked to the sword, saith the Lord. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, behold, evil shall go forth from nation to nation, and a great whirlwind shall be raised up from the coasts of the earth, and the slain of the Lord shall be at that day from one end of the earth even unto the other end of the earth. They shall not be lamented, neither gathered nor buried. They shall be dung upon the ground. But the idea is the whirlwind there. Winds are denoting strife, political commotion, and war. Sea represents peoples, nations, and tongues. Let's look at Revelation 17:15. Which states, and he saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest where the horse sitteth are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And the Bible tells us the beasts are kingdoms, kings/kingdoms. The 10 horns are 10 kings or kingdoms which should arise out of this empire. Rome was divided into 10 kingdoms, enumerated as follows, and the little horn is the papacy. Smith states, commenting on the prophecy that the little horn shall wear out the saints of the Most High, he quotes Barnes on Daniel 7:25, which states, can anyone doubt that this is true of the papacy? The Inquisition, the persecutions of the Waldenses, the ravages of the Duke of Alva, the fires of Smithfield, the tortures of Goa. Indeed, the whole history of the papacy may be appealed to in proof that this is applicable to that power. If anything could have worn out the saints of the Most High, could have cut them off from the earth so that evangelical religion would have become extinct, it would have been the persecutions of the papal power. In the year 1208, a crusade was proclaimed by Pope Innocent III against the Waldenses and Albigenses, in which 1,000,000 men perished. From the beginning of the order of Jesuits in the year 1540 to 1580, 900,000 were destroyed. 150,000 perished by the Inquisition in 30 years going on. In the Low Countries, 50,000 persons were hanged, beheaded, burned, or buried alive for the crime of heresy within the space of 38 years from the edict of Charles V against the Protestants to the Peace of Chateau Cambrésis in 1559. 18,000 suffered by the hand of the executioner in the space of 5 years and a half during the administration of the Duke of Alva. Indeed, the slightest acquaintance with the history of the papacy will convince anyone that what is here said of making war with the saints, verse 21, and wearing out the saints of the Most High, verse 25, is strictly applicable to that power and will accurately describe its history going on. And considering now, thinking to change times and laws. What laws are and whose? Not the laws of other earthly governments, for it was nothing marvelous or strange for one power to change the laws of another whenever it could bring such power under its dominion. Not human laws of any kind, for the little horn had power to change these so far as its jurisdiction extended. But the times and laws in question were such as this power should only think to change, but not be able to change. They are the laws of the same being to whom the saints belong, who are worn out by this power, namely, the laws of the Most High. And has the papacy attempted this? Yes, even this. It has in its catechisms expunged the second commandment of the Decalogue to make way for its adoration of images. It has divided the 10th commandment to make up the number 10, and more audacious than all, it has taken hold of the 4th commandment, torn from its place the Sabbath of Jehovah, the only memorial of the great God ever given to man, and erected in its place a rival institution to serve another purpose. And they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of times. Now, you know, we're running out of time. No pun. But, and I believe you all know this, that as it is explained by Uriah Smith, that a time is 1 year, 2 times would be 2 years. Dividing of a time would be a half a year, and that's 3.5 years. And then to go on and apply the day for a year symbol, as in Ezekiel 4:6 and Numbers 14:34. I'm not going to read all this because you know it, but it's here if you would like to review it. But 3.5 years symbolically stand for 1,260 days, each day standing for a year. And that represents the continuation of the supremacy of this horn. After describing the terrible career of the little horn and stating that the saints should be given into his hand for 1,260 years, that brings us down to 1798 and to this part that Smith calls sublime. The judgment was set. It would seem consistent to suppose that the same judgment is referred to in both instances. It's referred to twice in Daniel 7, but it's the same judgment. The sublime scene described in verse 10 is the opening of the investigative judgment in the sanctuary in heaven, as will appear in remarks on Daniel 8:14 and Daniel 9. We'll get to all that later. The opening of this judgment scene is located by the prophecy at the close of the great prophetic period of the 2300 days. Now, this prophecy, I had that last time. I'm going to skip on and quote J.N. Andrews a little bit. And this is from his book, Sermons on the Sabbath and the Law, 128.1. This great Antichrist is the papal power. Of this there can be no just doubt. The 4 beasts of Daniel 7 are in that chapter explained to be the 4 great kingdoms that have successively ruled the whole world. The 10 horns of this 4th beast are the 10 kingdoms into which the 4th empire is divided. The little horn arises in the midst of these 10 kingdoms, a different power from these, ruled by a priest king and warring against the cause of God. Paul, in 2 Thessalonians 2, presents us this great monster of iniquity as that man of sin and as that wicked, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth and destroy with the brightness of his coming. He goes on to say, he tells us, moreover, that the mystery of iniquity had, even in his time, begun to manifest itself, but that it was restrained by the existing hindrances, i.e., the pagan government that then controlled the world, i.e., Rome. Several hundred years of apostasy and rebellion against God were necessary to develop and mature this man of sin, before he was able to fill the place assigned to him in the prophecy of Daniel. Many acts of rebellion against God and of wicked and blasphemous conduct toward his law may therefore justly be expected of this great apostasy long before it reaches the place where it can stand up in the midst of the 10 kingdoms of the fourth empire in fulfillment of Daniel's prophecy, to war against God, his law, and his saints. And we're running out of time. I'm just going to scan through this to see if there's anything else. We're just going to have to pick up next time. I hope this hasn't been boring to you because it has been familiar to you. But these pioneers, Uriah Smith and Andrews and others, I wanted to see what James White had to say about this, but ran out of time, because once you get to studying, you keep studying. And you don't want to leave where you're at to move to something else. God is so good. I hope all of you have time to study. And I hope this has been a beginning, beginning blessing. But please, if you can, return next Sabbath, and we will try to shape it up and finish it and get into chapter 8. Okay, let's close with prayer, shall we? Father, I come to you asking that you will bless your people and that you will bless me. Time is so short. And yes, these prophecies in Daniel are familiar to us. But there's so much that we need to take from it and to understand deeply. So give us a mind that can delve deeply into this. And give me a mind that can remember it, please, Lord. And bless each one here. Help us to be ready for your soon coming. Soon the Son of Man will approach the Ancient of Days and receive a kingdom. We want to be in that kingdom, Lord. Thank you for the faithfulness of Daniel to write all this down for us, so that we would know what is coming on this earth and be prepared for it. Only you can prepare us, I know that. But you've given us your word in the spirit of prophecy, and we all have time. So bless us, help us, and guide us, I ask. In Jesus' name, amen. Until we meet again, may God watch between us and keep you and me to the great and terrible day of the Lord. Bye for now.